Matrix, William Miranda.
Patrick J. Aubuchon is a licensed private investigator, criminal justice educator, and veteran law enforcement professional with over 35 years of experience in criminal investigations and forensics. As the founder of Aubuchon Investigation, Patrick leverages his deep expertise as a former criminal detective to provide specialized consulting, surveillance, and detailed investigative services. In addition to his private practice, Patrick is an adjunct faculty member at Mount Wachusett Community College and a consultant for the Central Massachusetts Search and Rescue Team, drawing on decades of experience instructing at the police academy level. He holds a master's in criminal justice from Anna Maria College and is a highly skilled interview, interrogation, cold cases, evidence recovery, and peer support. And I'd like to welcome to the Paradigm Matrix, Patrick Aubuchon. Patrick, how are you?
Very good. Thank you for having me, Willie.
My pleasure. So I'm looking forward to a fantastic show. I want to first start off with, what brought you into the law enforcement career that you had for 35 years?
Wow. Well, initially, I wasn't going in that direction. I started off at Springfield College. I wanted to get into physical therapy, but I ended up taking the civil service exam in Massachusetts and did well. And then all of a sudden I found myself getting, what they call the civil service, the hiring card. The first one I got was from Gardner, then I got Leominster. And this is while I was 20. I hadn't even turned 21 yet. And, Gardner told me I was too young, and Leominster said, welcome aboard. But I have an uncle who was in the FBI. I have my mother's cousin was in the Secret Service, then the ATF. So there's some family law enforcement in there.
Well, that's terrific. That's terrific. Patrick, we both lived in the same neighborhood at one time. And then I ended up meeting you a couple of times because I was also interested in police work, And at the time that I met you, I believe you had taken some training at Quantico, correct?
Out there, I do.
But I thought that you had gone to taken some FBI training, you know what I mean? Some courses.
No, I went to terrorist bomb school in New Mexico.
Oh, that's interesting.
That might have been right around the same. Yeah. So I went out to Socorro, Mexico for a week to learn all about, terrorist bombing tactics. And we built bombs, detonated them, then, put the evidence together. So that was a pretty hardcore class. Sounds fun. It was fun, but there was a lot of stuff to learn. So I'd like to say that I enjoyed myself out in New Mexico, but we didn't have any time for that.
I bet, many years later, who would have thought? I know that you were ground zero.
Yes.
When 9/11 happened, and I bring that up because I did see you in the paper. I've seen some pictures, that from some photos of some of the Leominster police being out there. And I even know the fire department was down there. Some of the guys in the fire department were down there, volunteering and so forth. How was that experience for you?
It was surreal. I mean, I still, it's probably the one thing in my career that I think of quite often. I'm glad that I went. It taught me, when we put together the group to go down. So I went down on two different occasions, very close to one another, 5 days for each time, and arranged that with the help of Travis Valley, who just retired from Leominster Fire Department. But we were told that we weren't needed. People back here were telling us we weren't needed. They're turning people away. And, we had gathered a lot of supplies and we went down anyway. The first time we went down with a group of 6 of us in an RV, and we pulled up to the Jacob Javits Center right off the West Side Highway. And it was about 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning. And we went to NYPD Command Center, and they said, you're here to stay? And we said, we're here for whatever you need us for. And they told us if you could get a couple of hours of sleep and come back to the command center at 5 o'clock, we'll give you an assignment. They needed help so bad. And that first week, we did a whole bunch of stuff. I worked with the U.S. Marshals guarding a federal building. We did a lot of whatever they needed us for, we did. And although we went into ground zero that week, we weren't assigned there. And then week 2, we came back and we were assigned through NYPD to their evidence collection unit in ground zero. So we went to ground zero every day and never did the job that they told us we would be doing if they needed us. Thankfully, we didn't have to do that, but we stood by. And but I spent a lot of time doing peer work and walking around the site, talking to firefighters, talking to anyone that would talk to me. But it was a very emotional, high energy, very protective of that area. Obviously, FDNY, NYPD, Port Authority. So it was, I think back of it. I'm very glad I went, and it was an experience that I will never forget. But at the same time, just such a tragedy, really.
No, it is. It was. And
Yeah.
I bring it up, Patrick, because I have short memories in this country.
Hmm.
As the years go by, I remember when I was a little kid, December 7th was still kind of a little bit of a big thing. You know what I mean?
Right.
And us growing up, we're both Generation Xers,
Yeah.
so it's been what, how many years now? 20,
25.
26 years.
It'll be 25 this year.
26. Yeah, so, and it's as the years go by, you don't see I don't believe you see the same, you see the remembrance, but I don't know, I believe people tend to forget, you know what I mean? And so forth, I could tell you where I was that day. I was in a bottling plant installing some equipment. Okay.
Awesome.
Yeah, me and a good friend of mine, and go installing this equipment, and one of the production guys came over to us and said, "Hey, listen, I don't want to sound like I'm crazy or anything, but we just heard that 2 jumbo jets flew right into the World Trade Center."
Mm.
And I was like, "Really?" And I immediately went outside, took out my phone, I called my wife, and she says, "Can you get down here?" By this time, I think the second plane it was going to hit, and I said, "I don't know. I mean, I just heard about this. I didn't know it was." So we talked for a little bit. I hung up. I called the office, and they were like, "No, no, none of the guys are in the air." So see, I was supposed to fly back home September 10th.
Wow.
Yeah, and this happened, and I remember. I mean, we were probably there another extra 2 weeks, when they closed the border, and I was fortunate enough to have a hotel room in a car, because I don't know if you remember, but they closed down the airspace, and
Right.
any plane that was up in the air got brought down.
Right.
Okay, and some people, I remember seeing some people sleeping on the lobby. They didn't, there was no hotel rooms available. You know what I mean? And yeah, it was just crazy, and it was very odd. I remember taking the first flight out of Toronto to Philly, and then from Philly to Worcester, and it was so surreal. Because when I got up to the counter and they told me, take out your camera, take a picture, turn on your computer, the whole deal. They wanted to see if the security was just in another level.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I get into this plane. There were probably about a dozen of us in this flight, just a dozen of us. And I'm looking around. I went to sit on my assigned seat, and the flight attendant says, "No, you're not sitting there. You're sitting over here." And then I remember her sitting down. She had like a chair in front of the cockpit door, and she just sat there through the entire flight. She did not get up. Oh yeah, it was just surreal. Quiet. Nobody talked. Nobody said nothing.
Right.
Went to the airport in Philly. That place is a madhouse. Quiet. I mean, you couldn't. It was very surreal, like you said. And then flying over the city several times. Flew over Ground Zero for several weeks. I flew over Ground Zero, and it was still smoking.
Well, yeah.
Day or night, it was odd. It was
We
odd.
experienced the smell, the heat, all of the, all of that. We went down, I believe it was 6 days after, and it was still, it was incredible.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah.
I bet. I mean, thank God, man, that you guys were down there. Able to lend some support. Those guys really needed it.
Yeah, they
It was.
did. One thing I take out of that is, like I said, is, when someone tells you you can't do something, don't listen to them.
That's right.
Unless it's something that, you shouldn't be doing. But yeah, that always surprised me, was the pushback of us going down there. And a lot of the guys don't remember some of the things I do, but I also took notes. But that, and you can involve yourself in things, I think, and for me, going down we've never, people I went down with, we really don't talk about it. Every once in a while, I'll talk with Travis about it, but that's just not something that we talk about. But I think we each took something away from it. And for me, it was a part of just, one other part of my job that I did that I think, is something that I'll always remember. So.
Yep, I'm sure. I'm sure. And thank you for answering that question, because I know it's something that you don't talk about all the time. You know,
I don't talk about it too much
I
anymore.
know, I
Yeah.
know, and I believe I jogged your memory a bit, because I know that you had to go back and contemplate on some of those, on some of those answers. You
Yeah.
know, now going back to your police work and your detective work, I know that you're involved in the Raj case, correct?
Taj Nabo.
Taj, yes,
Taj.
Taj,
Yeah.
yes, yes,
Yeah. I wasn't involved in the case,
yeah.
for that was in 1981, but I ended up taking it right around 2002. I think the end of 2002, beginning of 2003.
And in a way, it's become somewhat personal too, correct? Is it safe to say that? You know?
I have to credit a very good friend of mine, Dr. Anne Marie Myers, who is a forensic anthropologist, archaeologist. She is very passionate, same as I am, with missing persons, specifically missing kids. And she gave me the best piece of advice early on. And this is probably back in 2005, 2006. And that was her advice was, when you start to feel, I don't think the word was overwhelmed, but I'm going to use the word overwhelmed. When you start to feel overwhelmed by it, when a case starts to consume you, it's okay to close the folder. It's okay to put it away. It's a cold case. That's also tough to understand, right? Because I know someone would say to me, well, how can you close your binder and put the case away for a little bit? And I get that part of it, especially if you're dealing with a family of a unresolved case. But for a person who does these type of cases, it's for your own mental health. So I know that I get into, I'll call it a groove with my cases, and Taj isn't the only one that I'm familiar with and that I do, and I have some that are upcoming, but it's okay to close that. So it's personal in the sense that I'm involved in it. I don't see the personal side as consuming me. I'm very knowledgeable of it. I probably have, the most knowledge out of anyone that's ever had the case. And that's just because I've been working on it for so long, and I've received new information through the years that was not known. So, but yeah, personal, I'm involved, but it does not consume me.
But it's one of these things, we're all human here. And of course, it could happen,
Oh,
and I'm
definitely.
glad that you brought that up. I'm glad that you brought that up, because it's, I've had my fair share watching in 48 Hours, I believe, or I believe it's that show. And,
Yeah.
you have these guys frantically, going after every lead, and I say to myself, man, those guys must get home. How the hell did they do it?
Right.
One after the other, one after the other,
One
one after
after
the
the
other.
other. Right. And
And especially in big cities, you know what I mean? You're talking about, some of these, New Orleans, these inner cities, you know what I mean, where it's just one after the, it's a grind,
right.
and I look at these guys, and they're there, late at night, working the phones, it almost becomes like more than a job, you know what I mean?
And
And
and that's the CSI effect, right? Is people that aren't within that world watching it on TV, because
yeah,
that 1 hour of filming probably took weeks and weeks and weeks of
yes,
filming, and then they
yes,
come up with an answer. So you have an answer within an hour with 4 commercials. So
yeah,
they skip through a lot of the dead ends and a lot of maybe the mundane, and and they don't. Someone asked me recently, how many hours have I put into the Taj case? And I could not even tell you. I couldn't
well,
tell
well,
you.
well, well, let's to the listening audience who's going to be watching, give me background on Taj, in that case, and and how you got involved also.
Yeah. So I'll start at the beginning. And this is something that I have very rarely talked about. When I was on it, I believe even when I was on the mayor's show, I didn't talk about this. I remember specifically sitting in the detective bureau at the old police station, and there were 5 or 6 of us in this very small room. And I always looked over toward one of the other detectives' desks, and I remember seeing this box, cardboard box with just paper sticking out of it, but the box was full. And over and over and over, and I kept thinking to myself, what is this? And then I finally asked the detective. I said, what's in that box? And he said, a missing kid from Leominster from 1981. And he said, take it, take a look at it if you want. And that's how it began. And, I literally was brushing dust off of that. And the one thing that I realized right away was the only way that I was going to be able to understand that case was if I put things in chronological order, because there was nothing in that file that was in chronological order. So you cannot, as an investigator, maybe not so much as a researcher, but as an investigator, you start from the beginning and you go and you're taking in information. So it was very difficult to pick up a piece of paper and have it listed, say, as June of 1982, over a year later. And then the next piece of paper was from 1986, and then you go back to 1981. So myself and Rick Gallant, who was a detective at the time, we put it all in chronological order. And that's where, our purpose, I guess, of the case came to fruition, was just putting this together and reading it at the same time, and, having questions and knowing what we had to do. So to make a really long story short, we realized that we needed help, because there was just so much different information, just a variety of information, and some made sense to us, some didn't. Some was factual, some wasn't. And we called down to the National Center of Missing and Exploited Children and requested Project Alert to come up and help us look at this case. And they did. They sent one retired NYPD detective and another Army Special Intelligence officer. Both the guys were retired, and they came up and they went through it with us. And that's where what I say that we went back to the foundation of the case, the very beginning of the case. And that just brought us right back to 15 Naples Street, where Taj disappeared from.
Okay. There's some huge resources.
Excuse me?
Those were some huge resources that were sent down to you.
Yeah, we brought in some really heavy hitters. I believe that's what I would refer to them as. National Center of Missing and Exploited Children. In the first couple of years, the FBI was involved. State police were involved, but it was ours. It always remained Leominster's, because it was a missing person. So,
Correct.
State police, although they have their cold case unit now, I don't know if they had it back then, but it's different when it's an unsolved homicide compared to an unsolved missing person. And that's not downplaying, the missing person part, but they give more resources or time to the an unsolved homicide. But, we brought in a lot of different, like I said, Dr. Myers came in. She was involved pretty much within a year of me taking the case. And then gradually it just became my case. And when I retired in 2016, I had all of that information in my mind, and I had notes, I had different things, but the case file stayed at Leominster. So I was able to continue picking at it and running information through the different people that I know outside of the law enforcement. And that became very easy, because there was no red tape that I had.
Correct. Yeah.
Once I retired, I had the freedom to do what I wanted to do, and I continue in that manner. But I also am transparent with Leominster PD, for several reasons. But they know I work on it, and I talked to one of the detectives there about different things, here and there. But for the most part, it's still on me. Someday I hope to either solve it or give all that information to someone that will run with it for
Well
years.
understood,
But
and he hasn't been forgotten. Now, who was Taj? Just for us.
yeah, so Taj was when he disappeared, he was 9 years old. He lived at his mother and stepfather lived at 15 Maple Street. He was in foster care at the time he disappeared. I can discuss that in a few minutes, but he was a student at Fallbrook School. Typical kid, lovable kid, angry kid. He didn't like his home situation, which is what put him into foster care right in Leominster. He was a member of the Jehovah's Witness church in Leominster, and was vocal about not wanting to be at his home anymore, and that was because he did not like his stepfather, and he was vocal about that, not only to family but to friends. I still speak with his friends now and again. I've heard from people that I've never spoken to over the past couple years. I've received messages from people that were either friends with him and recall something, or, adults that, were friends with the family or whatever. So, they went from the word cold case to unresolved. And I started calling it an unresolved relatively quickly because I still get information. It's amazing. 45 years later, and there's still new information that comes in, and at every angle too. Did he run away? Did someone do something to him?
Something from here, right?
Huh?
Wouldn't it be something if you got some information from somebody watching this? Watching
Yeah,
this
well,
interview?
that's always a possibility, and that's why through my page on Facebook, I'll post things. I will. And it's it's always around his anniversary when I put something out, and that gets incredible amount of hits, and that's when I have the majority of the conversations, and then I usually do the follow-ups after that with information that people provided. I talk to people, very, very familiar with the case pretty frequently, and we're still, I'm still pushing forward, just trying to get some resolution to it.
Of course, some closure. I'm pretty sure that his family, I don't know how about the situation with his mom is, and I'm pretty sure some of his school friends, I've read some articles regarding some of his friends, how they mentioned, the last hours that they saw him, the things that he would say, and listen, we all had our childhood friends, man, that we still can't forget.
No, I don't personally remember it. I didn't live too far away. I had cousins that lived right off of Maple Street, and for whatever reason, I don't remember it. And
Yeah. No.
it's very strange, right? But other people, and especially the people that knew him, the kids that knew him, it brings up good and bad memories, knowing him and then whatever happened to him. And like I said, I talked to them, and I think maybe I've asked the same question over and over, but, I think that just continuing to work on it, and there is someone out there that knows, what happened. And one of the questions is, I get all the time is, what do I think happened? So, I can have my personal opinion and I can have my professional opinion, and my personal opinion does not play into my professional opinion because it shouldn't. I can't have any biases. I have to look at it, continue to look at it with open eyes. And someone, I'll have conversations with people, and they focus down a certain path or toward a certain person, and I don't go there. And the reason why is because investigators look for probable cause. And when we talk about probable cause in Taj's case, there's no probable cause that he was harmed. There's no probable cause that he ran away. So, that's something that you can't make up, right? You can only take what you have in a case, listen to what people have to say, and, continue to look for more evidence leading you one way or the other. So is there a possibility that he is alive? Absolutely. And I'm not going to say much more about that, but those are avenues that, I've gone down. And, can I say that, he's dead? Like a lot of people, especially when you post something on Facebook, people will, name a name and and say he killed him and I got great information and, a reliable person told me that he died, but then I'll say, well, who's your
Yeah.
reliable person? And they don't answer and
Yep.
these people disappear, right? Because people just like to put something up there to make themselves feel important with no probable cause,
Correct.
so
Correct.
yeah, whatever, I hope there's a resolution someday. And I've said this from the very beginning. I don't care if it's me or if it's somebody else, as long as, and we were talking about earlier, right? We're that short discussion about, did I ever think that here we'd be online talking about a case and having, right, more exposure about a missing 9-year-old 45
Yes.
years later than the media has ever given.
Yes.
And I could talk about that too, about how difficult it has
It is.
been to get our local media, not going to name names, but I don't read it anymore, to be interested in a missing 9-year-old from 45 years ago, So people like yourself, and I think I told you I received a call not long ago from Crime Junkies, and they're looking into it, into Tasha's case. So it's all this online stuff, and it's all the sharing and Facebook and stuff like that
Yes.
keeps cases like this going.
It's one of the good things about social media and this technology, besides connecting us with old friends, with family and long distances, but for things like this, Patrick, I, when I messaged you, I was at work and I was very frustrated when I saw that article, and see many of them, pop up, and it's just local people, who happen to have a page, and are interested in things like this, and it really, when it comes to missing kids, missing persons, that should be a priority too,
Yeah.
Especially kids,
Especially kids.
know.
Yeah. I get asked why, but, and I think I had mentioned this to you in one of our previous conversations about, I mentioned it's incredible the beating that people take that will share missing person cases, or I take a beating on Facebook, for investigating it. It doesn't bother me, but I think it's funny that someone will come on to Facebook and say, I'm trying to make a name for myself. Those days are long gone. I do these cases to help families. It's my passion. And I have realized that for those critics, they don't understand because they've never spoken to anyone who's lost a child, right? And not have answers. If they were in the position of losing a child and not having answers, they probably would end up calling someone like me or the few people that will look at a case and follow up on it for them. So
Correct.
I don't, that's the human side of things that I don't understand. I don't really care to understand, but it's amazing that you'll have, like a Facebook page with 1,000 people on it saying, hoping to find your loved one or whatever. And then you have a person that is on there and just being nasty. Right. But that's their life. That's their life to live. It's a sad life, but I'm glad I'm on the other side of that,
I hear you. And it's, unfortunately, I think that's the way society is in these times. It's the way society is, A lot of people get to hide behind, some type of, what do you call it, a screen name, right? And
Yeah.
hide behind a phone and hide behind a laptop or computer and say something like this, but they would never say it in front of you and I,
Right. Well, that's the part of social media where you can hide behind, a fake screen name and, like every once in a while I'll comment. Next time you see me out in public, come up and say it to my face, because they won't. That's the thing, that people like that won't. That's why they're doing what they
That's
do,
right.
I always appreciate people that, even though you may disagree with what they're saying, right? They say it as themselves. And, we may shake our head but someone can speak their piece and speak it honestly without hiding who they are. But that's social media, isn't it? We talked about
Yeah.
that.
Oh, of course.
We have
Of
people
course. I mean,
putting,
it's been,
selfies every day of themselves, and they're filtered. And it's like,
oh yeah,
you do not look like that.
Exactly.
You're not 20 anymore. You don't
Yep.
know who you're fooling, but every day, right? Picture every other day.
Oh yeah.
I
Yeah.
think if you're
Oh
posting a
yeah.
selfie of yourself more than, once every month or something, I don't know what's going on, but that's for another show, Will.
That's right. Mine's are easy to age progress because I think when I post, I rarely post so you can age progress it.
It's progress. Yeah.
You know what
Yeah.
I mean? You go back, scroll back and you'll see it. It's like, oh yeah, I could kind of tell when this picture was taken,
Yeah.
what year,
Yeah.
what decade,
Yeah. But
right?
going back to doing the types of cases, and for Taj, he went to foster care. It was requested that he come home on Monday, March 30th, 1981. He didn't want to be there. He called his grandparents, called his grandmother. She wouldn't come and get him, told him everything would be okay, and had a conversation with his mother. And by the next morning, he was gone. So, and that was it. And it took me a while to understand that police work was different back then, very
Hmm.
different than it was when I took the case in 2002 or '03. And part of that was, you would never see, or you should never see, opinions in police reports in today's world. Opinions are a no-no. Opinions are biased, but we don't look, today, if a child was missing, the first people we look at are the people that are right around them, right? So the parents. And
Right.
maybe it's the grandparents or a brother or a sister. And, whether people agree with that or disagree with it, you go into, the harm of children fall right into people that they know, all right, whether it's sexual abuse or whatever it is. And we've seen that time and time again where a child goes missing and right, it's one of the parents that did something. And so it's a process that now we investigators go through is to rule out the parents or, whoever's involved in that child's life. And that's how it has to be done. That wasn't done in Taj's case. It was always looked at as strictly a runaway case and nothing more than that. Now, I
Hmm.
say that with caution, but I also say that knowing that I've read all the reports in the case. So there was that dynamic to it with a lot of different things included that you wouldn't see today. So that I don't want to say that it made it difficult or the case difficult. A lot of work was put in to the initial investigation, a lot of follow-ups, traveling. And that too was different because there was no way, today, right? If someone sees a kid and they're 5 states over, you can take a picture of that kid. You can send that, send a picture, right? Via email. It wasn't like that back then. So, traveling to that location or following up was more common than it would be today. So a lot of things were different but mainly the investigation portion of it was different. So but taking that information, and we had to go and separate, I've said this before, fact from fiction, what is accurate and what is not. And that a lot of people in the circle in the police department or people that had knowledge of the case were like, why are you doing that? Right. And it's like, well, if we can eliminate something that is not accurate, then we're going to save ourselves time.
Yes.
And we did, and we eliminated some things from that original case. So yeah. And then, you get to a point where, the base, you have your base, your foundation, and then you start building from there.
Pat, I want to ask you this. A lot of people think, and you had we had a meeting one time several weeks ago, and we were over coffee. We were discussing um, the investigation, police work. Okay, and my question is, if people, let's say, people don't have any idea what goes on in somebody's home. Okay, and let's say that this person just wants to get out of this situation and leave. Correct, and they don't want to be found.
Yeah,
That could happen.
absolutely.
And I'm not saying it because it's a 9-year-old kid that doesn't want to be found. I mean, I'm pretty sure that, let's say, some organization wants to help. Okay, let's say, and they they help them.
Yeah.
And they stay quiet. It's one of these organizations that stay quiet.
That is a very real possibility.
Yes, Patrick. So when my son decided to serve his country, we ended up going to, I believe it was in Western Mass, and he went to take the oath. Okay, so it was strange because all the armed forces were there.
Hmm.
So Army, Navy, Marines, Air Force, Coast Guard. So I guess they go to the center, and on the hour, every hour, somebody's getting sworn in. Okay. Now it was strange because it was full of, let's say, recruits, right? Or,
Yeah.
People who are getting sworn in. The strangest part was that I didn't see a lot of families there. Okay. It was only my wife and I. Then I saw another couple and their kids. But we were there for about 4 or 5 hours, and we didn't see anybody else.
Wow.
It was so strange. On our drive back home, we're talking about it, and then we're like, okay, I believe it was out in Pittsfield, I believe, where the center was. And we get back home, and it bothered me that you didn't see a lot of people there. Okay. Moving forward, 6 months later, my son's about to graduate from basic training. So we're going to fly out to, I believe, Missouri. But before I flew out there, I needed to find out about parking, accommodations. So I ended up calling the base and ended up talking to a sergeant over there. And I asked her, what is the protocol? Because I'm being asked if I have proper ID, if I have, a legitimate driver's license, and she's like, well, I'll explain it to you. Some of these licenses, like the state of Illinois, we don't recognize them because they don't have they don't follow these federal guidelines. And
Oh, wow.
we have to, it has to fall into these federal guidelines in order to be a proper ID to enter the base. So where are you from? I said, Massachusetts. She's like, are you okay? So I asked her, I said, listen, I got a question. My son was getting sworn in. I saw a ton of recruits, but I didn't see any families there, and the way she explained it, she was like, it is unfortunate that you don't see a lot of loved ones there, watching these young men and women taking a step, making a decision, one of the most important decisions in their lives,
Exactly.
in the young adult lives. But some of them could be, running away from something, and or trying to find an escape, and
Right.
they haven't told anyone, and when they're old enough to, basically sign their life away, they go ahead and do it. And I wonder if that's one avenue too, where people just, they become an adult and they disappear that way, Patrick. I mean,
Yeah.
if somebody wants to just disappear, they can disappear. I mean, we talked about it too, with Ted Nijinski, he disappeared. I mean, he
Yeah.
went off
Right.
grid,
Right.
you know.
Yeah. I think we just, without getting into the specifics, obviously, but I was just involved in a missing person case that myself and someone I do work with did, and another, the family had hired another company, and we started doing all of the background and just really trying to track where this person went. And the family hadn't heard from the person in about 5 years, and very little, if any, contact with friends, just gone, right? Just vanished. And we had a little bit of an idea. And I'll say this is, we were prepared. We were getting prepared to go and meet with these parents and say, we tracked your child so far and we can't track any further. And, when you say that, when you leave it open like that, it's, wow, what do you mean, right? Are they still alive? Are they dead? Right. And at the end of the day, when you're looking for someone who's missing, I think that sometimes there's always that hope, especially in this case. But if it was not for social media, and, I woke up, it was a Saturday morning, and, I jumped on the computer and we were somewhat done, with much of the work we had been doing. And I just had a couple things to follow up on. And I went down that rabbit hole. And all of a sudden I'm calling my partner that I work with. And I said, I think I found her. And, we were heading out to Western Mass that morning, and we did. And I ended up finding her. And it's because when people disappear in today's world, and they want to disappear, right? They're leaving whatever it is they're running away from, or they, right, want to just, get away from family or the life or whatever. If they cannot keep themselves off of social media, even with an assumed name, they'll be found, right? If they keep connection with one friend, one family member, they'll be found. As soon as you share something with someone, it's no longer a secret. That old statement, right? Once you tell somebody something, it's
That's
no
it.
longer a secret.
Mhm.
The only way things are secrets is if you say nothing to no one. And, but now jump back to someone like Taj. And, there's a lot of, I've done this so many times, and I ran, 5 years. So I ran, I think, from 76 to 86, right? There's 20 something people missing between Worcester County, Middlesex County, and Franklin County, right? And, the ages range, but those disappearances are a little bit different. And here's why. Because when those kids mainly, some, people, some adults, obviously, I think I cut it off at 23 though. So those numbers are 0 to 23 years old. They didn't have, they began, if they were taken someplace else, they began that new life with no extension to the world, so to speak, no social media, right? Back then. None of that. So they integrated into, whether it's a new family or whatever it was, much easier, right? Because the connection, if you want to speak with someone, right, you had to call them on the phone or write them a letter. It wasn't, you weren't sending emails and stuff like that. So same thing when you get into, whether it be social security numbers or name change and stuff like that. A lot of that stuff was pen to paper, pencil to paper.
And very easy to do.
Right? It's a little bit different, and so where now, right, if you look up stuff, it's right. If someone walked into a courthouse and they got on that public access computer that's in every clerk's office, right, they could check on your involvement in the court, you, me, anybody, right? The probate side, the criminal side, but you can only go so far, right? Because not everything is up onto the computer either. So same thing, so when, you have a kid from the late 70s, 80s, we discussed the case, that with new information that came up, that there's a possibility that this missing kid from Massachusetts was kept alive, right, for sex trafficking. There's and that's just another thing that has changed with these cases is I look back at, especially in the 70s and 80s, we have, there's several kids, several young people just, within 10 or 15 miles from Leominster, gone. Disappeared, right? Disappeared. And that's where unresolved work comes in, though, because, I ask, well, what's been done? What's been done since then? Is anyone working on it? No, I'm going to say it right now. If most police departments do not have someone that's working specifically on a missing persons case. We have the Taj case in Leominster. I do that. There's another case, Jerry Pisha, who's been gone for 16 years, right? An adult. He disappeared. I had some conversations with his sisters, and it had always been, from my knowledge of it, it wasn't my case, but I was in the detective bureau at the time, that, Jerry was going to go look for work in New England. And one sister just corrected that and said, no, that is not accurate. Right. So I don't know where that came about, but he's a big fisherman. He used to go down to the Quag in Sterling or Wachusett Reservoir, but no one is actively looking into that case. And there's so many like that. So when someone asks me why I do what I do, I cannot imagine being, and I've spoken to so many parents of missing children or unresolved homicide cases, and I would never want to be put in that position. But what I believe is that any of those parents, any relative that is in that position, should have an advocate for them. And that doesn't mean
And that's what Aubuchon Services does, correct?
Well, that's part of what I do. Yep, but
Yeah.
that's my passion. So I was just involved with the Leonard Mercury missing person case up in Gardner.
Yes.
You know, I called Central Mass Search and Rescue. They searched 110 acres, and it's very difficult because you're dealing with the emotions of family, and they want answers. They want them yesterday. And what I did in that case is just try to really manage things as best I can with respect to law enforcement, with respect to the family. But what we did in that case was we ruled out that Leonard was on the ground around the hospital. We knew that he wasn't there. So the next step would have been Crystal Lake. And then, we got down to, the ice melting on Crystal Lake and the weather warming up, and had a conversation with Gardner and just said, this is a real possibility. So what's going to be done going forward? And appropriately, they said, we'll be putting the drone up, and checking the lake. And that's how he was found. So, and it's just managing it. It's not, I'm not in it to critique what a department does or doesn't do. It's just really to be supportive of the family and make sure that everything's done. And we just, I offer a service that helps them. Central Mass Search and Rescue, they're a volunteer group of trained, search
Professionals.
personnel. They
Yep.
do a wonderful job, and they're going to go through stuff in the woods that someone in uniform is not going to do, and I'll tell you why, because those uniforms that police wear are expensive.
Oh,
People do not like when they're ripping their stuff and no one's
yeah.
paying for it but them.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
but the search team does that. And so I'm a proponent of them. And, I like getting their name out there too, because they provide a great service that does not cost the family anything.
Right, it's all volunteer work, man. God bless them. Patrick, what are the advantages in today's world of having accessibility to a drone where you don't have to call a helicopter in, and it's, that's a huge resource, that has to be, moved from place to place. And it's a hell of a lot easier probably to have access to a drone, with a thermal camera, or something like that, and really take off from anywhere, and have that flexibility.
Yeah, it's a great use of technology, and I'm all for them. Leominster has 4 drones. That's incredible. They have, I believe, 12 operators. So, but the drone is only as good as the operator is.
Correct.
Right, just like any other bit of
Oh, yeah.
technology. A canine is only as good as the handler.
That's right.
So there's always, any time that you have humans involved in anything, there's room for error. So even though I'm pro drone, that doesn't mean that if someone said to me, I flew a drone over these 100 acres, we're still going to search those 100 acres, shoulder to shoulder, to make sure that, and drones are great, but in cases that, the older cases, or, a case that has been, New England's different, right, with its weather. So, when someone's been missing for 6 or 8 months, depending on what it is, you're going to start seeing a lot of changes decomp to the body, and that person is not going to be in one piece. So, now, even though you have a drone up in the air, if it's 6 or 8 months later, what's your ability to pick up a body part compared to a body?
Correct.
So drones are great if it's a fresh case. I had this recent discussion with a friend of mine about underwater drones and being able to put a drone in the water when there's a possibility that a person went into water. And we had the same discussion, and that is, but does that replace the physical search that needs to be done for, by a rescue and recovery diver? And again, the same thing, possibly, it doesn't replace it, right? You may have to go in that water.
No,
So
it doesn't. It's just another tool. I think we discussed these
tool, yeah.
gentlemen that go out there and do some missing persons cases, around bodies of water, specifically
Yes.
over bridges.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And you can imagine the kind of pushback that maybe some of those guys get, because the the guys, law enforcement officials will say, we searched these areas, and nothing's come up, and these guys have gone on there on their own time, okay, with
Yeah.
their own money, and gone out there with something with a fish finder or something, and they go out there and they could pick out cars, and then one of them will put on a wetsuit, put the tanks on and
Yeah.
take a dive down, which is dangerous, because you don't know what you're going to find down there. You could get tangled up, and whatever. But I mean, they go down there and they actually recover
Right.
these cars, and some of I mean, the same thing always comes up. I mean, it sounds cliche, but I've, as many times as I've watched many of these videos, the law enforcement officials saying, we just searched that area. We searched right over there, and it was maybe 4 or 5 feet over and
Okay.
missed it. Some of the cases, some of these people were not too far from making it home.
Right.
And
Yeah, that happened. That happened right here in Massachusetts a few years ago. I'm very familiar with the case, and someone came down and they wanted to search a river, and we're told that it's already been searched, and the person put their boat in the water, and they found a missing female from, I think the case was 40 years old, and that's one thing, and obviously I'm a proponent of law enforcement, but I can be a critic because I was in it. I did the job. I know their thoughts. And, I think the worst thing that can happen is when someone and that's one thing, go back to Taj, which it hasn't happened to me, right? Is that when you get so protective of the case that you're doing that you want no one else's involvement, that that's where the disservice is.
mhm.
And then if someone that I've had a conversation with about the Taj case and said to me, hey, I'm going to walk through Lincoln Woods across from Naples Street, and right, do you mind? I'm not going to say no, you can't walk there, it's a public area, right? If I get a phone call and that person said, hey, I think I just found him, right? I'm going to get my car and go down there. And if and it's not that did that person find the person I'm looking for? The fact I just had this within the past couple of years of a lot of work, a lot of physical work searching we did, and and it came into question, it was, did we actually have somebody here at one point, a deceased person? So, but the way I look at it is if, I'm out in the woods or anybody's out in the woods and they find anyone that's missing, right? They've done something good. I tell people all the time that walk, that are out in the woods and stuff. Don't pick that bone up and throw it out. Take
Yep.
that bone and bring it in. And I know police departments would shake their head, but we've had cases, local case where a couple of bones were brought into a police department, a fire department, and the bone was thrown out right in front of the person that brought it in. And then several months later, the woman said, I think you need to come where I am because I just found a human skull. Right. So
Mhm.
there were human bones, and they have to go to the medical examiner's office. They have to be measured and photographed the right way. Going out into the woods and finding a long bone, you can't assume that it is a deer bone. I don't care who you are unless you're a forensic anthropologist.
I think you kind of know, if it is if it's something like that, what
Yeah,
type of
well,
bone it is. You would think,
yeah, you might know, you might not know.
Yeah.
I've been around it a lot. I've seen a lot of, not so much in the field, but
Yeah.
through people that I know, I'm fortunate to have seen real human bones and different but I would never ever say to somebody that, well, this belongs to this or this belongs to that.
Yeah.
I can't
Yeah.
professionally
You
say
can make a
one way or the other.
determination.
I'd be guessing,
Correct.
you know.
No, I understand. Going back to the Taj, the one that kind of hits me the most is when I see his photograph. Because it reminds me of my school photograph. He
Mm,
had one of those. All of us. You know what I mean? Had that pose. You know what I mean? From
right,
back in the day.
right.
Had that same pose. It's you kind of. I don't know, man. I kind of see I think it's something that's in all of us, right, Patrick? We see ourselves, you know what I mean, as a kid, and what happened to him, there's so many questions,
Right.
and what I was talking to you about seeing somebody had posted on your Facebook page a photo of Taj, and it was on a Kroger. I think it
Oh,
was like yeah, like in a bag, like a Kroger bag, and it said, missing. I
missing.
believe it had the missing and exploited children on it, right? The
Yeah, I
center.
believe it did.
It
Yeah.
had the number, and of
Yeah.
course, they made it out all the way to a Kroger supermarket store, which, mostly in the South or Midwest,
Yeah.
made it all the way out there.
Yeah.
And somebody from Leominster had recognized it and posted it on your page.
Yeah.
Okay, so it means that his photo and the information of his whereabouts are out there. Have made it out that far.
Right. That's and that's back then, right? Now you times it by, I don't even know what you times it by now with,
Yeah.
my anniversary posts of him on Facebook get, over 100,000 interactions and,
Yeah.
the shares and the numbers just go crazy. And yeah, and yeah, there's so many differences. I think of that all the time, and just the ability to, had he been there's reports that, there are a couple of kids that, well, not kids now, but kids at the time that to this day swear that they saw him at school the day he was missing. Right?
Wow.
Yeah, or the day after he was missing. I might have to correct myself on that.
And underground or inside,
Yeah,
inside the school?
is at
In
the
the
school.
ground? Is at the school?
Yeah, they've maintained that for a while. You know,
Well,
I in the past couple months, I talked to someone who said that, their siblings had information that he told them, and they called in a couple of times and no one ever came and talked to them. And so now I'm in that process of, I don't want to say begging, but, will you please talk to me? Right. And
yeah.
people have put that away. They put that away because they
Mhm.
talked to one kid who shared something with his mother, and his mother didn't believe him. Right. And, so, as a child, when a child comes forward and says, hey, right, this has happened to me, or I have this information, or this is what he said, and adults don't listen to that, right? That child goes on in their life remembering that, and then
Yes.
eventually they give up. And I'm still hopeful. I have a few people that will be willing to talk to me. Right now, they're not, but I hope that they will, because I think, any bit of information is important. And I've seen this in several different cases but in the Taj case, there was a lot of that where things were said to a parent. The parent did not believe them. And, we had just going back when I was young, back in the 90s, I was riding with Tom Cudahy. We were down behind right where Home Depot was. Used to be
Okay.
an open field with the water that bordered it, the backside of the hill there. It was a dirt road that went back there. Periodically, car 4 would check it. And we were driving. I remember this like it was yesterday, listening to the Red Sox game. This was back in the early 90s. And we saw a branch move. And what is that? So we drove over, we got out with our flashlights, and it was this kid that was stuck up to his chest in the mud.
No.
This is at 8:30 at night. It was night. It was dark. And, just by whatever sent us down that dirt road, and right, just
Wow.
we saw this branch shaking, got out and checked it. So this kid and a friend of his had gone down to the mall. They were going home, so they were crossing over this swampy area, and
Yeah.
they were on a log, and one of the kids fell into this swampy area and got stuck, couldn't get him out of there. So he said to his friend, go home, right, and bring help. Okay. The kid went home. This kid went home. It's a funny story now,
Oh
because it
man.
ended up okay. But he told his mother that, his friend fell off the log and was now stuck in mud. And the mother said, I'm so sick of you lying. She gave him a spank and without dinner and sent him to his room. He fell asleep, but the mother didn't believe him. And thankfully this kid was seriously up to he would not have survived the night,
Thank God you guys were there.
Yeah, it was just, for whatever reason, right? We're at the right spot, the right times. But, that's one thing that the Taj case has had is a lot of information that was there, but it was never pursued or it was never shared. Both pursued, by police and shared. And, 45 years later, still working on it.
His mother's still alive, correct?
She is. Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Yep, she is still alive.
And I wonder if she's lost any hope.
People are different. Annette takes a beating on social media. She knows that she does, even though she's not on it. There's family on it. A lot of criticism about why she didn't do this, that, or the other thing, or, and I guess her position all along. But, she was very, very involved the first several years after Taj disappeared. I've seen the letters of her requesting certain things and, things involving the investigation. And, I don't know. Everyone, we have people that are, they will fight and fight and fight for answers. And then some people won't. And, the sad part about cold cases is that, we don't have the people that we need around forever.
Yes.
The grandparents, both the Taj's grandparents, Eunice and Lewis, have both passed. They're certainly two people that I wish that I could have gotten an answer for, but that's life. And I've been asked, do I feel guilty? And I don't, only because I always tell people I can't guarantee you something, but what I can guarantee you is I'll keep trying. But, when people pass, and I met with them several times and they were wonderful people, but they never got that answer, and
that's tough.
Yeah, and that's tough. And so, yeah, I think as far as his mother goes, I don't know. I don't know. I talk to her. I still talk to her here and there. She knows I'm working on it. I think she wonders why I'm still around doing it. One of the first times I talked to her, she said, you have to understand that anyone that ever tried to reach out, she didn't speak to many investigators. She refused. People tried to get a hold of her. She would not return calls, and she returned mine. And I've been talking to her every year for the past 23 years. So
that's a long time.
Yeah, that's a long time. I've
a long time.
Talked to her more than anyone ever talked to her. And yeah, sometimes she said, I don't, this is too upsetting for me or whatever. But she's answered questions, and, I just, I can't, like anything else. I can't drag information out of people. I can't pull it out of them. I can't make assumptions. I'm a factually based person.
And being on that other side of the fence, in her shoes, it's not easy. It was her son, no matter what.
It's not. It changes people.
Yes.
It changes people. It changes, it changes people in ways that I don't understand.
That's what people on social media don't understand. You know what I mean? They haven't taken the small amount of time to put themselves in those shoes. You know what I mean? I don't even want to think about. I've gone in some details with you. It's we're both parents. We can never ever imagine anything like that.
Yeah. I've talked to I had many conversations. We used to do Molly Bish Day in Leominster. Became friendly with John and Maggie Bish. Had a incredible discussion with Maggie one day where, she got emotional, and so did I. And the Paranin family I've met a lot of people that have lived the same nightmare, right? In different ways, obviously. And I think when you go down that, but it's like, what do you say? Right? People say, well, what do you say? And
what can you say?
It's like, listen, it's okay. It's okay, right, to bring up that child's name, right? It's always okay. It's like talking to someone that is diagnosed as terminal. It's okay to talk to them. It's okay to ask them if they're ready. It's okay to ask them, can you share something with me? And I'm going to bring up a name, Hector Melendez. Willie, did you
Yep.
know? I don't know if you know. Did you
Oh,
know
yeah, I know
Hector?
Hector.
Right,
Yep.
very good friend of mine. I was so
Very good
blessed,
guy, and
so blessed to be able to go and see him before he passed. And I've only shared one thing that he shared with me with anyone, but I never shared the rest of it. And he comes a time in our life when I truly believe that people know more than we are capable of knowing. You and I, those are the people that are terminal, right? They know much more because they're there. They're at the end, and they look at things differently, right? It's like the fish in water, right? The fish
Mhm.
doesn't notice the water. It's around them all the time, right? And that's how we live our lives. We don't notice what's around us until we only know that there's so much time left. And then we
Right.
notice all of that stuff, right? So to talk to a family that has had this tragedy happen, it's special. And that's what a lot of people don't have the opportunity. A lot of people, even if they had the opportunity, wouldn't know how to have that conversation. I've had them. They are very difficult, but it's the reason why I feel that all of these families of the missing deserve someone on their side that has the investigative experience. And that's not necessarily a retired law enforcement. Some of the smartest people I know have never even gotten into the world of law enforcement. They're just incredible at what they do, So I just welcome, anyone that can help with information or wants to do people contact me. Is there something I can do? I'll say, can you research this case top to bottom for me and present it to me? And so, they kind of put the bullet points together for me so I can look at a case, and people do extremely good work,
Oh, yeah.
but they're not investigators, but they're great analytically. And man, police departments, investigators would be lucky to have some of the people that I know that do this stuff.
Well, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
That's and again, I'll go back to some of that pushback that you probably get from departments. Okay, especially in cases. I think I don't like to say they're egos or anything, but I think we've all been there when we're working on something and somebody tries to intervene and say, hey, try it this way, and we're like, we turn around and we're like, get out of
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
And it's innocent. That's innocent in all of us. You know what I mean? And it takes a lot to be able to stop yourself and step back and say, hey, any ideas?
Hmm.
I think a lot of times we have to. I try to do it a lot. Is putting my pride in my back pocket. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And keeping it there.
Well, it's good to have, it is great to have somebody that keeps you in check, right? I have at least one person that I can think of with these cases that keeps me in check, right? Why am I going down this path? Explain to me
Yep.
why you're going down this path. Explain to me why you're doing this. Why do we have to do this? And they do it in a kind of a blunt teaching way. And it's always led back to, it's my mind going down a path, even though I already have the answer. I don't have to go any further. I'm thinking of something specific, but I can't say what it is because it's not known. But I think sometimes when you work these cases, you get blinders, right? And blinders are tough. And the other thing that is tough is not welcoming someone into your investigation. Now, I can welcome anyone into Taj's investigation because I'm a private investigator. I'm not law enforcement anymore. Right.
Yep.
Law enforcement has their role in it. But like I said, at the end of the day, if I'm so protective of this case, that's what we didn't understand is why are there people that don't want us to reopen the Taj case? And that happened, right? They did not want us to open the Taj case, which made me think, why don't they want us to open the Taj case?
Mhm.
And, it's because we were learning things. We were learning things that were true and things that weren't true. And it pissed people off, and, but at the end of the day, it was about rebuilding, restructuring the case so it was once again workable. And I think, had I, I guess if I had a weak spine, I would have cowered and not taken the case on. And it's just the same thing now. I have no problem walking into a police department and having a conversation and saying, I'm here. How can I help you? How can I help you? And if they say you can't, my response is still the same. Well, I'm working on this missing person case, right? Because I can. I'm not there to snub anybody. I want to work alongside people, and then if that someone else solves it, someone else solves it. Like the case I was talking about that, they put a sonar in the water and found this young lady after 40 years of an area that was searched. I was very familiar with that case. I was very familiar with the people that were working behind the scenes and aren't law enforcement in that case. And they ticked some people off, but you know what? You know who they didn't tick off? The family.
Yep.
And,
That's right.
so we can do it. I think that's where I offer something different than a person that is a private investigator that was never in law enforcement is that I do have that knowledge of how they work. I have that connection to them. But at the end of the day, it's working together. And I think with the right person, the right people involved, a department's never going to turn you away because they're not putting in money towards these cases where, a private investigator can. And,
Yes.
And at the same time, I'm not looking at the dollar signs in any of these cases, especially cases that have been so old. It's how
Yep.
can we help at the minimal cost to you, and how can we still bring law enforcement back in so they can do some of the work as well?
Correct.
Because they have tools that I don't have, and I
Yep.
have freedom that they don't have. With
Yeah, it's
things.
funny how that works, huh, Patrick?
Yeah,
You
well,
know, isn't it?
it's nice being retired, but I have to figure out how to not be busier than when I was actually working,
Yep. Yep.
but enjoying it nonetheless.
Oh, yeah, of course. Of course. And Patrick, how can people get in touch with you? Through Facebook,
Get in touch with
your
me. So
Mm-hmm.
website?
my Facebook page, Aubuchon Investigations. Send me a message there. My email is aubuchoninvestigations@gmail.com. Yeah, but Facebook, a lot of what I get is through Facebook.
Okay.
And then other cases, that I do. I don't do every single case that is out there. Not most people, but a lot of people call and say, will you follow my husband? Will you follow my
Oh,
wife?
man.
I do not need to do those cases.
Oh,
I can
man.
get them someone that will, but
Yeah.
I'm too busy doing other things that allows me to bypass things like that.
Of course. Of course. I'll make sure to put that in the description of the video when,
Great.
upload the video,
Great.
to put that, put your information there. And it's fantastic to have some type of advocate, I believe, in cases like this. It's amazing, a lot of these cases that are for missing persons who go national, and have
Yeah.
been, I mean, to this day, there still hasn't been some type of either the person not found or the murder of the person or the child, What comes
Yeah.
to mind is John Benny Ramsey.
No, right. Right.
Okay. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, the father had all kinds of resources. You know what I mean? Monetary resources.
Right.
Okay.
Well, look at Nancy Guthrie,
That's right.
right?
Another one
Nancy
where
Guthrie.
celebrity,
It,
daughter,
yeah,
national attention.
and then you can have another whole other show on, right? Nancy Guthrie, right, gets all kinds of media attention while
Correct.
we have all these other people that are missing that get none.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I know the family donated money to the National Center of Missing and Exploited Kids, which was kind of them. But yeah, that's the reality of it. Just is that
Uh-huh.
a lot of these cases will never be solved. and you don't understand, people will say, well, why, if someone just vanishes or takes off, Gardner still has the Aaron Pennington case that murdered his wife, right? Where is he?
Where is
He's
he?
not around Lake Collier. They've searched every inch of that area where his
If he
car
wanted to
was.
disappear, like you said, the way you disappear is social media. You're out of social media. I
Right.
discussed this with you, the Olympic bomber.
Yeah.
Just like
Yeah.
my old boss told me, he goes, I grew up
Eric
in those mountains
Rudolph.
up there. He goes, I grew up in those mountains. If you ever want to disappear,
Yeah.
that's the place that I would go. And he told me, he goes, they will not find you. For how
Right.
many years this man went without getting caught?
Well, he only got caught because he got hungry and went down to a dumpster and got caught by a
That's
rookie
right.
cop.
That's right.
You know,
That's right. And if it
he
wasn't
made a
for that,
mistake.
yes,
They searched everywhere around him, and they didn't find him.
he was up in those mountains.
Yeah.
He got hungry. He probably got tired of eating stuff that will make a Billy go puke,
Right.
like Colonel
Yep.
Trump said about Rambo,
Oh, it's true.
and he probably got
Made a
tired of that.
mistake. He made a
And
mistake.
yep,
Well,
yep,
thankfully, right? Thankfully,
yep,
he made a
yeah,
mistake. Yeah.
of course, and the rookie cop ended up making that huge arrest, and the
Yep.
poor guy, and there was a poor guy that was getting pinned for the whole bombing. He was innocent.
I know. Yeah.
He was innocent.
He was innocent. Yeah. Well, and that's,
That's not a
again,
show.
rushing to judgment and not doing a
Thorough
good
work.
investigation and having
Yes.
bias come in.
Yes.
We've seen it even here in Massachusetts with cases, and you can't, man, especially today's world, it's you have to cross those T's, dot the I's, and do everything with perfection because it's awful. We all lose
Yep.
cases. Every cop
Right.
loses a case. No one is perfect, but if you're not learning something when you lose a decent case, then you're not helping yourself or any future victims.
True. And again, we go back to John Rene Ramsey, the father having all the resources in the Nancy Guthrie case, where they had those cameras. Okay. And this person is still missing, no matter how much national media, the attention, I mean, nothing.
Nothing. No, that's I believe that something happened shortly after they took her and they don't have her anymore.
No, no,
They,
no.
unfortunately, I think something, whether she had a medical event or they did something to her, and they disposed of her. That's,
Yeah. I mean,
I hope I'm wrong. I hope that, she's someplace but no contact from anybody.
it's unfortunate.
Sad.
I mean, I'm not gonna sit here and at the end of the day, she was a mother, grandmother, somebody's sister. The whole. She happened to get national attention because of her daughter. Who her daughter was.
Right.
And
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
she
That's
can't
how,
do anything. Yeah, you
that's
can't.
how
She
we
can't
are.
do anything about that. You know what I mean?
No.
It's. But
But
again, it goes to show you, even with all those resources and anything else. I mean, it doesn't mean that it's a open and shut case, or that you're going to have all these big leads, even in this world that we live in within the information society, right?
right.
With the age of cell phones and everything else, sometimes you would think, man, it's got to be impossible to get away with something like that.
Yeah. But
Well,
yeah,
guess
it
what?
still is possible. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, Patrick, thank you so much, man, for being
Well, you're
my
welcome
guest here.
anytime.
And I
Anytime.
and I let me tell you, I can't wait to have you back
Yeah.
and have some more of these discussions.
Yeah,
And
absolutely. I know we have a
you-
lot to talk about just from our
oh no,
prior meetings.
without a doubt. And I believe I told you I did when I had my other show on KCOR out of Las Vegas. I did 2 shows on missing and exploited children.
Mm,
And what I do here, like yourself, it's a passion. I don't get paid for any of this.
right,
Okay. In
right.
reverse, I invest into this to be able to
Invest
do
into
this.
that's well, yeah.
Okay.
So
So
why?
yes, yeah. So with different types of people, right? Correct. There's got to be something in our DNA that's something, right? That's strange.
If I had all of my
But
stuff in the back of my car and someone would be like, wait a minute, what do you have this stuff
that's
for?
right. That's right. So, but I was amazed at the amount of children, and when we're talking about children here, we're talking about, the age that you consider not an adult, okay?
Yeah.
They go missing each year, whether they run away. Yeah, there's some that run away, you know what I mean? And there's some that, parents kidnap them, you know what I mean? Or you have those situations. But to have over 700,000 kids, let's say, go missing a year in this country, okay, no matter what the circumstances are, that's troubling.
Right. Right.
Patrick, that to me, that's mind-boggling. That's unfathomable. You know what I mean? It's just it's something that I can't comprehend, and it's not giving enough attention.
Hmm.
I shared some articles with you today, or some post, about
Oh, right.
some, in Rhode Island.
Yeah.
Somebody, a group of men that were and women that were trafficking kids.
Yeah,
Okay,
trafficking a 14-year-old girl. So,
yeah,
that's the thing. As soon as I read that, I thought, okay, someone in that group she knows, right? Traffickers, I think it's about 30%, an employer that will traffic someone. Relatives are right up there, right? So, trafficking happens with, it's not how we think. It's not, we think of trafficking, kidnapping, right?
yes,
It's trafficking of kids, right? And it sounds like, they named one, well, not named, but 14-year-old. And, they probably, and that was their group, right? That sent that child out and basically pimped that kid out. And you know what? And it's everywhere.
it is.
It's everywhere,
It
and,
is.
but again, right, throw something out on social media and people will fight against it.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, that's a whole other episode.
Oh yeah. Oh
Go
yeah.
down that
And
rabbit hole.
we'll have
Yeah.
that discussion. We'll have the discussion, and I think we'll rattle some feathers. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And hey, you know what? Too bad.
that's right.
Too bad.
Yeah.
Too bad. I mean, this is again, this is something that shouldn't be happening. Unfortunately, it does happen.
Right.
And I don't think it gets enough of the airtime.
Yeah.
I don't get it gets enough. I don't think I certainly believe it doesn't get enough from our so-called representatives. Okay,
Mm,
to do much about it. You know what I mean?
right. Right.
More or more. Okay, do more.
Yeah.
I think at times, I think they're part of the problem. Okay, and and as long as I'm able to do this,
Mm.
I'm gonna keep saying it. Mentioning it.
Yep. Yep. Well, when you're not afraid to look at something, you're not afraid to talk about it. And a lot of people just don't want to dive into things that make them uncomfortable or acknowledge that it's an issue, and it is, and
That's a huge issue.
it has
To me,
been
it's a
for a
huge
long
issue.
time. It's
Yeah.
just didn't start. It goes all the way back to,
Oh yeah. Oh
long
yeah.
time.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Again, Patrick, really appreciate your time. You know,
Yes. Thank you
and I
very
hope we
much,
get.
Willie.
Listen, I hope we get together again.
Yep, definitely.
And have a great conversation, especially here. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? I want to have one here. And of course, you get an open invitation to the show.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate
All right,
it.
Patrick.
Thanks for
Thank you
having
so
me.
much.
All right. Take care.
All right, you take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
Welcome to the Paradigm Matrix with your host, Willie Miranda. This has been the Paradigm Matrix hosted by Willie Miranda.